Somebody with a mild accent started to leave half-recorded messages on my telephone answering service, where one could only hear words like, you give me a call, or, give us a call soon, okay? I could not understand why such urgency, and indeed could not understand how I could return those calls when no phone number was left. Obviously, the person obsessively calling me on a daily basis did not realize that I did not have his number, and began recording his messages while the outgoing message was playing. Neither was he telling me his name. Later I wondered if he was the man who accompanied the other who obtained my phone number at that festival, pondering that perhaps he wanted to have more guide drawings, but without his number I could not respond. This situation continued for a while, and I felt sorry for him, constantly trying, but I was unable to answer him before he hung up. He relentlessly kept leaving his partially frustrating and agitated messages. When I was finally able to catch his call and get his phone number, I was able to talk to him. Following this, he gave me his address and invited me to his home in Caulfield to have a little chat. However, before going any further, out of respect and for possible legalities, I have decided to suppress his real name. Therefore, I shall identify him differently throughout this book as Damon. For many months, he interrogated me about why I did not respond to his phone messages. Unfortunately, this was going to be his trend for a very long time. Because of personal engagements needing a little peace to do a number of things, I could not respond to telephone calls from people who did not disclose their contact details. However, he seemed to specifically target those times when I was unable or busy creating a piece of art. I knew it was causing a certain amount of frustration with some people like him, but I also had my needs and was not answerable to anyone. However, causing unnecessary frustration on their side and possible anger was not my desire, for one hoped that others could be a little more tolerant towards each other. I suppose it never entered into the equation with some people. They had to get what they wanted immediately, then and there. My very first impression of Damon was that he belonged to that category. However, knowing what I did, I could tolerate people with all their foibles. Obviously, he needed to learn about my personal trends, my nature, and my way of thinking. Unfortunately, many seem to lack the wisdom to comprehend the needs of others. Only time would tell how things would develop with this prospective new acquaintance. He was a very well-established Jewish businessman and very proud of his achievements, believing he had created his wealth through hard work and a little bit of luck. According to his own account, he owned a number of petrol stations and had several people working for him. Being interested in extraterrestrial phenomena and his dreams of being involved in a journey into space and other worlds, he chose to call at least one of his petrol stations with a name related to his interest, asking me to design a new logo for him. I made a few suggestions, and he selected one. He appointed the services of a few other people known to him to create the title, and was very proud of doing so. He was originally a tradesman, working for a company which had built the hotel complex Hyatt on Collins in Melbourne. He was divorced and had two lovely daughters he adored. They were living with their mother and father-in-law, who was extremely rich, and, as he called him, a boss. His wife had custody of their children, whereas he had legal access. He often offered his beloved daughters large sums of money to buy things for themselves. He also had great interest in his young lady friends, except for one we will speak about a little later. His home was huge, with all the mud cons and a big swimming pool, often visited by his friends, who he called his boys. Many of them and their families often gathered at his place to celebrate special holidays as well as Sabbaths. Occasionally I was invited to attend those festivities, although he, like many of his friends, was not particularly religious. They all enjoyed the traditions. During those times, a passage from the Good Book was read, and prayers uttered in Hebrew, followed by a communal feast, and much trivial discussion on every subject imaginable. Such activities added color to their lives. Everybody seemed to be very happy. When invited, it gave me the chance to practice my Hebrew and Yiddish. I was able to converse in their language, with some minor lack in my grammar, but there were those who offered me a helping hand to learn and correct some aspects of the language, for which I am thankful. Those occasions reminded me of the times when frequenting the shul, or local synagogue, in St. Kilda, at the invitation of friends, for celebration of Purim, which particularly the children found delightful. Many of my Hebrew-speaking friends were very happy and nice to each other generally. Damon was initially a very friendly and seemingly generous person, aged about 45. However, having learnt a little more about the most puzzling human nature after all these years, could one really trust people in general? Had I become unnecessarily overly cynical about life? This thought passed through my mind like a lightning flash. But what did I have to lose if I played the game of believing, although deep down I could not, without being pessimistic about the issue of trust? Throughout my life, I experienced too many anomalies and much mistrust. Too many so-called friends had proved themselves to be untrustworthy, and certainly untruthful. Therefore, I remained a very neutral observer, while making sure that my new friends could never notice it behind the personal mask where I lived. For them, I was simply what they saw in me, and I was never the type to betray or tell untruths. What I knew and observed always remained behind closed doors, until I was satisfied with their readiness to share my discoveries. Otherwise, I was happy to remain a mystery. However, I am honest in all my undertakings and associations with people, whether they accept me or not. Some described me as a puzzle, and somebody who knew a lot more than what he appeared to. On the other hand, there were those who considered me not as sophisticated as themselves in intelligence, education, and even their social standing. When Damon and his associates met me, they seemed to appreciate what they discovered, for it was easier to communicate intellectually with them. No matter what their background was, whether a lawyer, supervisor, office manager, actor, laborer, or businessman, it was not of any concern. To me, it did not matter who they were or what their social standing or occupation was, for I respected and accepted them all. They all had their own ideals, their own questions about life, just the same as I did, and it was refreshing to talk with them, knowing they were comfortable with my qualifications and knowledge, unlike my so-called family. There were also those who chose to remain pessimistic and judgmental towards others, no matter what their origin, believing they alone belonged to a supreme race and were chosen by a greater authority to lead the nations. They were just like the witnesses I had encountered over the years. I have also respected them, for after all, their beliefs were based on how they had been educated, no matter how totally disrespectful they were towards others of a different persuasion. I always believe in peace. Therefore, in the face of inappropriate or very naive behavior displayed by anyone, I remain silent, yet ready to explain things without condemnation. This led me often being judged wrongly by extremists, like the Jehovah's Witnesses, who destroyed my beautiful family, and that many others all around the globe. They did this by using and manipulating the naive characteristics of people like my ex-wife. They proved themselves to be the most judgmental people against the entire human race. It taught me a very valuable lesson in life. It taught me to be aware of people's motives, not always trusting everybody, realizing that they were all fallible. But I remain an everlasting optimist about the human race. After his discoveries about my background, Damon wanted to become good friends, inviting me to meet his family, daughters, associates, and family friends. Being of Jewish origin and familiar with the ancient sciences based on the Kabbalah, he sought further enlightenment, but his findings were not enough for him. He sought for answers to his endless queries by consulting those allegedly learned occult practitioners. Although he was not entirely sure about the truthfulness of those mediums or soothsayers, he was befriended with Christie, who practiced the art. He used to consult her to channel to the other side, which was believed to be where all the deceased and guardian angels dwelt. During their special meditations, members of the other side had been imparting their knowledge about how to build his financial empire and conduct his love affairs with pretty women. Christie had been channeling for him for a period of time, but according to what he told me, there was something very basic and important missing. With Christie's blessing, he recorded most of their meetings for future reference, and let me listen to them. In those recordings, we heard her channeled information from a number of great teachers of the past, and his endlessly repeated personal questions, which the poor girl had been struggling to find answers to. But whatever she answered him apparently helped him decide what further steps to take to achieve his goals. When I met Christie, she told me she would be extremely happy to pass him on to me, for she had been relentlessly questioned on all kinds of subjects which interested only him. Answering him with the same again and again had been tiring, and she would be happier if someone else like me took over. Damon told me that Christie had spoken to him that their role was now to be transferred to someone very knowledgeable, and he would greatly benefit from it. It was obvious she had just enough, although it would be an interesting experience, and maybe one could help him to be more satisfied with his personal space in the world. If I could help anyone through the science of psychology to understand their own selves better and overcome some of their uncertainties, I would be happy. But did I need to be the one doing it? After meeting him several times over cups of coffee or meals in St. Kilda or Chapel Street restaurants, talking on subjects he was keenly interested in, he suggested that I could do the same as what Christie was doing by channeling between the two worlds. That took me back to the times when I lived in Perth. I suggested that we could try it one day, together with Christie. To me it was a little deeper than just inspirational speaking, and I was unsure how it was going to be taken. By this time he had somehow discovered my past association with Shirley MacLaine, a well-known star of the silver screen. I rarely met with her, and only when traveling, particularly in Peru. However, meeting people at such times and having conversations with them does not mean that we have known each other well. Shirley believes that there is something good in each of us, and that conversing with intelligences from different dimensions is real, and that life other than on Earth is a fact. She has many friends and associates, and I would be very surprised if she could recall everyone's name. She used to invite psychics and fortune-tellers to her home, and was very keenly interested in unusual and outlandish art, with a very poetic approach to the subject matter. She is a great thinker, and has written several books, possibly after much encouragement to do so through psychic advice, and has appeared in great roles in films like Out on a Limb, which made her famous. Her book with the same title featured her affair with Andrew Peacock, her travels to Peru, and her discoveries. In my eyes, my role was insignificant, but I hope I had a positive influence on her. I preferred to remain totally invisible, unlike her other associates, and it was my personal choice. There have been people who would seek every excuse to consider approaching famous and significant celebrities, although some are unapproachable. Perhaps they deliberately forgot that celebrities are also human, living upon this earth we call home. But a chance meeting with the famous is not impossible. Damon was somehow knowledgeable that I met Shirley, and it gained his special attention. Having met somebody who had associated with the famous was of supreme importance to him. He had seen the film Out on a Limb, and fell in love with it. After discovering that I had met Shirley, he was very excited to associate with me. He insisted on believing that I knew her very well. Whenever I attempted to correct his assumptions, it seemed I was hitting my head against a brick wall. At every opportunity, he told all his friends and associates that I was somewhat related to Shirley. It was very embarrassing, and got completely out of hand. I had to resort to explaining that I wanted to keep some things hidden, as it was better that everybody did not know everything about me. Would this strategy work, I wondered. Damon constantly interrogated me, almost on a daily basis, with his endless questions in regard to Shirley's private affairs, which I had no idea about. Maybe I should have become a gossip columnist. By now I discovered what I was dealing with, but felt the need to keep quiet about my findings. By the look of things, my association was going to become devastatingly disastrous in the long run. It started to feel as if I had fallen into a dark pit. When we met at his place on a weekly basis, we conducted a little meditation and some channeling, which he wanted to record, but I did not get to listen to any of them. After about an hour, we discussed some of the concepts spoken about during the session, followed by his relentless questioning why I did not respond to his calls for a long time. Later he declared his ideals, an absolute desire to change the minds of people. He could not understand that the concept of changing one's own mind was the only way to see any favorable changes in the world. Just like my birthdays, while experimenting with channeling activities, I missed whatever had been channeled, as I had no chance to listen to them. In this case, everything recorded was kept by Damon. He obviously believed that he had found a significant treasure just for himself. When there was any attempt to declare that all knowledge was for the whole of humanity, he would strenuously exclaim that he hated the world of humanity. He often demanded, "Give me the keys, Professore, and I will wipe off all of humanity." When I met Christie for the very first time, while Damon prepared hot drinks, She discreetly exclaimed that she was so happy about my being there, for she was driven to the brink. Christy further explained that she was praying for someone else to take over, for she needed to be free again and have some peace from his endless questions. I wondered what all that was about. I was to discover it soon enough. Considering his demanding behavior, his endlessly repeated questions, and desire to wipe off humanity, as can be understood, I started to panic. I understood why she was keen to drop him on me, but I prepared to remain calm and reserved, believing that things would change for the better. As a reward, Damon later paid and organized a trip to Peru for her. When she returned and visited him, she could not hide her excitement about having materialized a trip of this kind, recommending that he visit that country. She told me she was now keen to materialize a laptop computer. I hope she got what she wanted. Damon told me that after attending a meditation session at Doreen and Jerry's, he was bored while sitting to relax his mind for a few minutes, but declared that he enjoyed the discussion, later suggesting that we could perhaps continue with the sessions he had started with Christy on a weekly basis, adding that there may be some others visiting him, and we could try to conduct a short meditation and discussion program like that, making me believe that Christy was also going to be present. When I questioned him, "No, professore," was his response. "I think you should do the channeling, and we can discover many secrets about life, about people, about money." We started those sessions with some apprehension on my part, for when someone is not well known and there are no familiar faces around, one wonders what kind of reception could be expected. Imagine being in the presence of someone pretending to be friendly and having no idea what they were capable of doing. This assumption is not lightly spoken of, although we may be living in a world of people with friendly disposition. There are also a different group of people who may have unethical or even murderous intent. Alas, the world has become a battleground between good and bad, right and wrong. It would take enormous courage to engage in situations like that. There were times when sitting in a large seat in front of Damon, closing my eyes to concentrate on channeling with other dimensions, or possibly other intelligences, I always felt soupçon of fear within, a fear of being physically harmed, for I was in the presence of someone volatile, and was unsure what his response to unusual information would be. Then again, maybe my apprehension was ungrounded, although anyone with my previous experiences would feel likewise cautious. When I heard a small portion of the recordings he had made, his voice almost always sounded as if he was more fearful than I. However, I thought it was also very courageous on his part to invite someone he hardly knew into his house and question the so-called higher intelligences or another being from elsewhere in regard to his business and personal affairs through that person. On the other hand, whenever I was back in my natural everyday consciousness after those sessions, although a couple of hours might have passed, the time spent felt like only a few seconds, but I developed a degree of fatigue after every channeling session. Damon was incapable of noticing it, and I knew he was relentless when bombarding the other consciousnesses alongside mine with his endlessly repeated questions. Occasionally some of his friends or young daughters visited him, and it was quite a surprise for me to find myself surrounded by a few curious people after waking up from my experience. When Christie attended some of those sessions with him, she was extremely enthused. I also knew that my having met Shirley had made them feel part of the circle, but that association with Shirley was not of a permanent or intimate kind, as Damon wanted to believe and preached about. I did not want to live under the shadow of somebody, famous or not. I prefer to be me, and be accepted as I am, not a pretender, unless I had a theatrical assignment I was paid for. However, my understanding was that Damon, being a very wealthy individual, preferred to pay nothing for the services he received. He told me that this was the best way to keep his riches for more important projects. I was expected to conduct those sessions only for the love of it, and nothing more. As far as he was concerned, I was an intellectual, and interested only in study and learning like one of his brothers back in Israel, who was not really interested in building his finances. That was certainly an interesting assumption on his part. From the very first moment I met Damon, he presented a character of wanting to be domineering at all times, although he did not realize that it was not possible with everybody. He relied on his wealth being the only medium to feel the utmost courage to control people, obviously unable to realize that not everybody worshipped money like himself, and his conveniently pretentious associates. He assumed that I would also adore and even worship him for his money, perhaps even considering financially profiting. This attitude was to become more and more evident later. Often he exclaimed that wealth was the only important element in one's life, and people from poorer portions of society considered the wealthy as gods. Maybe there were some like that within any given society, but maybe that was the way he chose to think of others, due to his current or past experiences, which I found to be very hard to comprehend. Through his attitude and words he clearly declared the poor as being arseholes, but the wealthy he considered as being highly intelligent. As time went by, and he began to discover a little more about me, he started to change his behavior, or it came across like that. But, as was his desperate need, his character of dreaming of absolute supremacy over others remained. He explained that he did not come from a very wealthy background, but when he was very young, a mature lady of wealthy Jewish origin in Israel had fancied him and shared a portion of her riches with him. I was to meet this lady when she visited Melbourne, much later. He had 2 gorgeous cars, as he called them, Mercedes and BMW. When driving them, it made him feel very superior, and his passenger was expected to feel highly privileged. Sometimes, when he invited me to accompany him when visiting 2 of his favorite restaurants, Sienna on Chapel Street in South Yarra, and one typically Jewish restaurant in Auckland Street in St. Kilda, he would sometimes ask me which one of his 2 babies he should take. You can guess what his babies were. He preferred his steak practically raw, and loved balsamic vinegar in a generous amount of olive oil in which to dip his bread, but there was no chance for me to enjoy the environment or food, as the whole time was taken up answering his multi-layered questions. Damon was very critical of his father-in-law, often complaining about him. He continually spoke of his own grand philosophies on wealth, often declaring There are 3 things in life people kill for. They are wealth, beauty, and intelligence, professore, and I got them all. I visited him fairly regularly because delving into meditations and channeling were interesting subjects to experiment, although it required great trust and courage on my part. Obviously, he respected my intellect, or so I thought, but my insignificant association with Shirley was of tremendous value as far as he was concerned. Probably hoping to meet her one day for some benefit, he did not want to let go, and became obsessively possessive. Therefore, whenever he went on holiday, having a little break from him became a great need and relief for my own peace of mind. Many of his associates and friends began asking me how one could endure his special attitude as if he owned people. At first I could not really understand why they were so concerned about this issue, but soon it became apparent. When he spoke in terms of why my family wanted to keep away from me, although the subject matter was extreme, and I did not particularly want to talk about it, I felt obliged to tell him what he wanted to hear. Did he perchance desire to compare my circumstances with his own?